The wildflowers were still wet with dew when Natalie Crawford's fingers first closed around the ripe blackberries, staining her calloused palms purple in the Nevada morning. She had been picking berries in these hills outside Piotch since, before dawn broke over the jagged mountains, filling her wooden buckets with the sweet fruit she would sell at the mining town's market, just as she had done every summer morning for the past 3 years since her father died in the mines. The work was hard and the pay meager, but it kept her and her younger brother fed in a town where silver was king, and a woman alone had few options. Yates Kincaid saw her before she saw him, a silhouette against the rising sun, bent over the berry bushes with a concentration that spoke of necessity rather than pleasure. He had ridden out from the cattle drive camp before the other men stirred, seeking solitude and perhaps a moment of peace before another long day pushing 2,000 head of longhorns north toward Montana. The sight of her stopped him cold, something in the graceful economy of her movements, the determination in the set of her shoulders, the way the early light caught the auburn in her dark hair. "Morning," he called out, not wanting to startle her but knowing his presence on horseback would frighten her more if he stayed silent. Natalie spun around, her hand instinctively moving to the small knife she kept at her belt. The hills around Piotch were not always safe, especially for a woman alone. But the man sitting easy in his saddle had an honest face, weathered and tanned, with eyes the color of summer sky. He looked to be in his mid-20s, not much older than her own 21 years. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, not a miner or prospector, and something about his quiet demeanor made her relax slightly. "Morning," she replied carefully, her fingers still stained purple, her buckets half full at her feet. "Did not mean to disturb you," Yates said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect his mother had drilled into him years ago back in Texas. "I was just riding and saw you working. This is hard country for anyone to be out alone at first light." "I have been managing for 3 years," Natalie said, hearing the defensive edge in her own voice but unable to soften it. Too many men in Piotch thought a woman alone was fair game for unwanted attention or worse. "I know these hills better than most. I am sure you do." Yates swung down from his horse, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. Up close, she was even prettier than he had first thought, with dark eyes that held both wariness and strength, and a face that would have been beautiful if it were not so marked by fatigue and worry. "Those blackberries for sale, at the market in town," Natalie said. "I sell them at dawn every morning through the summer. People buy them for pies and preserves." "My name is Yates Kincaid," he said, extending his hand. "I am with the Patterson Cattle Drive heading north. We are camped about 5 miles east of here." Natalie hesitated, then took his hand briefly. His grip was warm and work roughened, the handshake of a man who earned his living with his hands. "Natalie Crawford." "Miss Crawford," Yates said, and something in the way he said it, with genuine respect rather than the mocking tone some men used, made her look at him more closely. "Would you mind if I picked some berries alongside you? I have about an hour before I need to be back at camp, and I have been craving something sweet besides the cook's terrible cobbler." "These are for selling," Natalie said, but her tone was less sharp. "I need every bucket to make enough money." "I will pay you," Yates said immediately. "Whatever you would get at market. I just haven't had fresh berries in months, and the picking looks peaceful. I will stay on that far bush, out of your way." Natalie studied him for a long moment. Something about this cowboy was different from most of the rough men she encountered in Piotch. There was a gentleness to him, despite his obvious strength, and a loneliness in his eyes that matched something in her own heart. "All right," she said finally, "but I do not have an extra bucket." "I have my hat." Yates said with a grin that transformed his serious face. It has held worse things than berries. They picked in comfortable silence for a while, the morning growing brighter around them, the Nevada heat already building despite the early hour. Natalie found herself stealing glances at this stranger, watching the careful way he selected only the ripest berries, leaving the unripe ones to mature. Most people just grabbed everything they could reach, but Yates picked with the care of someone who understood growing things. "You are a long way from Texas," Natalie said finally, surprising herself. She usually avoided conversation with strangers, but the quiet felt too heavy somehow. Yates looked up, berries staining his fingers now too. "How did you know I am from Texas?" "Your accent," she said. "And your saddle. It has that double rigging that Texas cowboys prefer." "You know horses," Yates said, impressed. "My father worked the mines, but before that he was a hostler," Natalie said. The mention of her father still hurt, even 3 years later. "He taught me about horses before the silver fever took him." "I am sorry," Yates said quietly. "Mining is brutal work." "It killed him slowly," Natalie said, the words coming easier than she expected. "His lungs just gave out one day. Now it is just me and my brother Thomas. He is 14, working as a stable boy at the Grand Hotel. Between us, we manage." Yates wanted to ask more, but something in her face told him she had shared enough. Instead, he said, "I left Texas 2 years ago. My family has a ranch outside Austin, but I am the third son. Not much future in staying when my older brothers will inherit. So I have been working cattle drives, seeing the country, trying to figure out what comes next." "That must be lonely," Natalie said, her bucket nearly full now. "Some days," Yates admitted. "But there is freedom in it too, no one telling you who to be or what you owe them. Just you and the horse and the work." Natalie understood that freedom, the kind that came with self-reliance but also with isolation. She had felt it every day since her father died, the weight of responsibility and the strange liberation of answering to no one. "I should get to town," she said, though something in her was reluctant to end this unexpected conversation. "The miners' wives like to shop early before the heat." "Let me ride with you," Yates said quickly. "Those buckets look heavy and the road to town can be rough." "I walk it every day," Natalie said. "I know you do," Yates said, "but today you do not have to walk it alone." Something in his eyes, a combination of hope and genuine concern, made Natalie nod. Yates carefully transferred the berries from his hat into one of her buckets, overfilling it slightly, then pulled out several coins from his pocket. "For my picking," he said, pressing them into her hand. It was more than she would have made selling them at market, but before she could protest, he added, "They are worth it. Best berries I have had in years." He insisted on loading her buckets carefully onto his horse, securing them so they would not spill, then led the animal at a slow walk beside Natalie as they made their way down the rocky trail toward Piach. The town was already stirring when they arrived, smoke rising from cook fires, the distant sound of the stamp mills processing ore from the mines. Piach was a rough town in 1885, born from silver strikes and populated by fortune seekers, miners, gamblers, and those who served them. Violence was common, law was loose, and survival was never guaranteed. Natalie set up her small selling spot at the edge of the main street, arranging her buckets on an old wooden crate. Yates helped her, seemingly in no hurry to leave, and within minutes, customers began to arrive. He watched as she haggled with the miners' wives, her prices fair but firm, her manner courteous but not subservient. She knew her worth and the worth of her labor, and she did not flinch when people tried to bargain her down. "You are good at this," Yates said when there was a lull. "I have had practice," Natalie said, counting the coins in her small cloth purse. Everything is negotiation here. If you show weakness, people will take advantage. That is true most places, Yates said, but you handle it with grace. Natalie looked at him then, really looked at him, and felt something shift in her chest. This cowboy with his honest face and gentle manner was looking at her like she mattered, like she was more than just a poor woman selling berries to survive. It had been so long since anyone looked at her that way. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the company this morning and for the help." "Can I see you again?" Yates asked, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Tomorrow morning, perhaps, I could help you pick. We will be here another week at least, resting the cattle before the long push north." Natalie knew she should say no. Getting involved with a drifting cowboy was foolish, nothing but heartache waiting to happen. He would leave when his drive moved on and she would be left behind with nothing but memories. But something in her, some part that had been locked away since her father's death, wanted to say yes, wanted to feel alive again, even if just for a week. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow at dawn. Same place." The smile that spread across Yates's face was like sunrise itself, and Natalie felt an answering warmth in her own heart. He came the next morning as promised, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. They fell into an easy rhythm, picking berries as the sun rose, talking about everything and nothing. Yates told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about his mother's fierce love and his father's quiet strength. Natalie told him about her childhood in California, before the silver strikes brought her family to Nevada, about her father's dreams of striking it rich, about the reality of barely scraping by. With each sunrise, they grew closer. Yates began arriving earlier, sometimes bringing coffee he had begged from the camp cook, and they would sit on the hillside watching the light change over the mountains. Natalie found herself laughing again, something she had almost forgotten how to do. Yates made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced since her father died, listening to her stories with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he really cared about the answers. On the fifth morning, Yates brought his guitar, an old battered instrument he had carried from Texas. As they picked berries, he sang quietly, old songs his mother had taught him, and Natalie felt tears prick her eyes at the sweetness of it all. This cowboy was working his way into her heart with every passing hour, and she was powerless to stop it. "Play something happy," she said, wiping her eyes quickly. Yates launched into a lively tune, something with a fast rhythm that made her smile. "My brother James plays fiddle," he said between verses. "We used to play at dances back home. I miss that sometimes, the music and the dancing." "I cannot remember the last time I danced," Natalie said wistfully. Yates set down his guitar and stood, extending his hand with exaggerated formality. "Miss Crawford, may I have this dance?" "There is no music," Natalie protested, but she was already standing, already reaching for his hand. "I will hum," Yates said, and he did, pulling her close and leading her in a simple waltz through the berry bushes. Natalie laughed, really laughed, as they spun and stumbled over the uneven ground. When they finally stopped, both breathing hard, they were standing very close, Yates's arms still around her waist, her hands on his shoulders. "Natalie," he said softly, and the way he said her name made her heart race. "Yates," she whispered back. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, tasting of coffee and morning air. Natalie melted into him, all her careful walls crumbling. When they finally pulled apart, both were shaking slightly. "I am sorry," Yates said quickly. "I should have asked first. I did not mean to presume." "Do not apologize," Natalie said, touching her fingers to her lips. "I wanted you to." They stood there in the growing light, the berries forgotten, just looking at each other. Finally, Natalie said, "You are leaving soon. Your cattle drive." I know, Yates said, and the pain in his voice was real. I have been trying not to think about it. We should not do this, Natalie said, but she did not move away from him. It will only hurt more when you leave. Then come with me, Yates said suddenly, desperately. Come north with the drive. We can get married in Montana. I will find work on a ranch there, build us a life. You and Thomas both. I have some money saved. It is not much, but it is a start. Yates, we have known each other less than a week, Natalie said, though her heart was singing at his words. I know, he said. I know it is crazy, but I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Every morning I wake up excited to see you. Every moment with you feels right in a way nothing else in my life ever has. Maybe it is crazy, but maybe sometimes crazy is just another word for taking a chance on something real. Natalie wanted to say yes immediately, but practicality held her back. I cannot just leave. I have responsibilities. Thomas depends on me. We have a room in a boarding house, work here. What if we go north and there is nothing? What if it does not work out between us? What if it does? Yates countered. What if this is the chance we have both been waiting for? You said yourself that life in Piotch is just surviving, not living. Do you want to pick berries alone every morning for the rest of your life? Do you want Thomas to end up in the mines like your father? That struck home. Natalie had nightmares about Thomas following their father into the dark, dangerous tunnels. The thought of him coughing up rock dust, dying slowly underground, terrified her. Let me think about it, she said finally. This is not a decision I can make in a moment. We have 3 days before the drive moves north, Yates said. Think about it. Talk to Thomas. I will accept whatever you decide, but Natalie, please know that I am serious. I want a future with you. I want to build something real. That afternoon, Natalie sat Thomas down in their small, cramped room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. The room was barely big enough for 2 narrow beds and a small dresser, but it was clean and relatively safe, which was more than many in Piotch could claim. Thomas, I need to talk to you about something important, she began. Her brother looked up from the book he was reading, a worn copy of Treasure Island he had borrowed from the hotel library. At 14, he was already showing signs of the man he would become, tall and lanky with their father's dark hair and serious eyes. Working at the hotel had been good for him, keeping him out of the mines and giving him a glimpse of a wider world through the travelers who passed through. Are we moving again? Thomas asked. They had moved 3 times since their father died, always seeking cheaper rent. Maybe, Natalie said, but not in town. I met someone, Thomas, a cowboy named Yates Kincaid. He is with a cattle drive heading north to Montana. Thomas's eyes widened. You like him? I more than like him, Natalie admitted. I know it is fast, but he asked me to come with him, to marry him and start a new life in Montana. And he said you would come too, of course. He wants us both. Do you love him? Thomas asked simply. The question stopped Natalie. Did she love Yates? She had known him less than a week, but the thought of him leaving, of never seeing him again, physically hurt. When she was with him, the constant weight of worry she carried lifted. He made her laugh and feel hopeful about the future. He treated her like an equal, not a burden or a commodity. Was that love? I think I might, she said honestly. Is that crazy? Father married mother after knowing her for 2 weeks, Thomas said. He told me that story once, said when you know, you know. But what about you? Natalie asked. You have your job here, your life. I cannot ask you to leave everything. Thomas set down his book. Natalie, I see how hard you work. I see you leave before dawn and come home exhausted every night. I see you counting coins to make sure we have enough for rent and food. I see you wearing the same 2 dresses because you spend every extra penny on me. If this cowboy can give you a chance at something better, at being happy, then we should take it. It will be hard, Natalie warned. We would be traveling with a cattle drive for weeks, living rough. And Montana is unknown territory. There are no guarantees. There are no guarantees here either, Thomas said. Except that we will always be poor and you will always be exhausted. At least in Montana, we will have a chance at something different. And maybe I can learn to be a cowboy too. That seems better than carrying bags at a hotel forever. Natalie hugged her brother tightly. When did you get so wise? I learned from my sister, Thomas said, hugging her back. That evening, Natalie went to find Yates at the cattle camp. The sun was setting as she rode the old mare she had managed to buy cheap from a prospector leaving town, following the directions Yates had given her days ago. The camp was a sprawling affair, hundreds of cattle bedded down for the night, chuck wagons and bedrolls scattered around cooking fires. The smell of beef and beans filled the air, and several cowboys looked up with interest as she rode in. "Can I help you, miss?" one of them called out. "I am looking for Yates Kincaid," Natalie said, suddenly nervous. "Yates," the cowboy hollered, "you got company." Yates emerged from near one of the wagons, and his face lit up when he saw her. He jogged over, catching her horse's bridle. "Natalie, is everything all right? Can we talk?" she asked. "Privately." Yates helped her dismount and led her away from the camp, up a small rise where they could talk without being overheard. The last light of day painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and in the distance, the mountains stood like dark sentinels. "I talked to Thomas," Natalie said without preamble. "He wants to come. He said we should take the chance." "And you?" Yates asked, hardly daring to breathe. "What do you want?" "I want to say yes," Natalie said. "But I am scared, Yates. I am scared of trusting this, of trusting you, of leaving everything I know even if that everything is not much." "I am scared too," Yates admitted. "I am scared of not being enough for you, of failing you somehow. But I am more scared of letting you go, of spending the rest of my life wondering what if. If I say yes, I need you to promise me something," Natalie said. "Promise me that no matter how hard it gets, you will be honest with me. No secrets, no lies. If we are going to build a life together, it has to be built on truth." "I promise," Yates said solemnly. "Complete honesty always. Natalie, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust." "Then yes," Natalie said, and saying the word felt like leaping off a cliff and finding she could fly. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes, we will come north with you. Yes to all of it." Yates let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her properly, deeply, with all the feeling he had been holding back. Natalie kissed him back, feeling truly alive for the first time in years. "We should get married here before we leave," Yates said when they finally broke apart. "I want to do this right. I want you to be my wife, not just someone following the drive." "The minister in Piotch will marry us," Natalie said. "Tomorrow, if you want. We do not need anything fancy." "Tomorrow," Yates agreed, "and then we start our life together." They were married the next afternoon in the small church on the edge of Piotch, with Thomas and 3 of Yates's fellow cowboys as witnesses. Natalie wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton she had made herself, and Yates wore his cleanest shirt and vest, his hat held respectfully in his hands. The ceremony was brief, the minister clearly more interested in his fee than the sanctity of the vows, but when Yates slipped a simple gold band on her finger and said, "I do," Natalie felt tears of happiness slip down her cheeks. "I do," she said in return, her voice strong and sure. "You may kiss your bride," the minister intoned, already turning away to enter the marriage in his ledger. Yates kissed her sweetly, tenderly, and Natalie felt the rightness of it all settle into her bones. This was her husband now, this gentle cowboy who had seen her picking berries at dawn and chosen to pick a future with her instead. After the ceremony, they returned to the boarding house to collect Natalie and Thomas's meager belongings. Everything they owned fit into 2 small trunks and a handful of bags. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, was sorry to see them go, but accepted their departure with the philosophical air of someone who had seen many people come and go in a transient mining town. "You take care of yourself and that boy," she told Natalie. "And you," she said to Yates, fixing him with a stern look, "you take good care of this girl. She has had enough hardship for one lifetime." "I will, madam," Yates promised, "with my life." That night, Yates paid for a room at the Grand Hotel, the nicest place in Piatch, for their wedding night. It was a luxury they could ill afford, but he insisted, wanting to give Natalie at least one night of comfort before the long, hard journey north. The room was small but clean, with a real bed and even a wash basin with fresh water. Thomas bunked with one of the other cowboys at the camp, giving the newlyweds privacy. Standing in that hotel room, Natalie suddenly felt nervous, almost shy. Yates seemed to sense her hesitation and took her hands gently. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said quietly. "We have all the time in the world." "I want to," Natalie said. "I am just nervous. I have never been with anyone before." "Neither have I," Yates admitted, and Natalie looked at him in surprise. "I wanted to wait for someone who mattered. I am glad I waited for you." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, and gradually her nervousness faded. They learned each other that night with gentle patience and growing passion, creating their own private world in that small hotel room. Natalie had expected pain or awkwardness, but Yates was so careful with her, so attentive to her comfort, that there was only closeness and pleasure and a sense of profound rightness. Afterwards, lying in his arms in the dark, Natalie whispered, "I love you, Yates Kincaid." "I love you too, Natalie Kincaid," he whispered back, and hearing her new name made her smile in the darkness. They joined the cattle drive the next morning. The trail boss, a grizzled old cowboy named Bill Patterson, was not initially pleased about adding a woman and a boy to his crew. But Yates had a good reputation, and Patterson owed him for some skilled work with a difficult remuda a few months back. "She can cook or mend," Patterson said gruffly, looking Natalie over. "And the boy can help with the horses, but I run a tight drive. No special treatment because you got yourself married, Kincaid." "Understood, boss," Yates said. "They will pull their weight." Natalie bit back a sharp retort. She was used to proving herself, and she would do so again. Thomas, standing beside her, looked excited rather than intimidated. The adventure of it all appealed to his teenage imagination. The drive north was harder than anything Natalie had experienced. They rose before dawn every day and worked until after dark. The cattle were constantly trying to stray or stampede. The weather was unpredictable, swinging from blazing heat to sudden thunderstorms. They forded rivers and navigated rocky passes, and there were days when Natalie was so exhausted she could barely stay on her horse. But Yates was always there, encouraging her, helping her, making sure she and Thomas were safe. And gradually, the other cowboys accepted them. Thomas proved himself a natural with horses, learning quickly and working hard without complaint. Natalie's cooking was better than the usual trail fare, and her skill with a needle earned gratitude when she mended torn shirts and ripped trousers. More than that, Natalie found she was good at life on the trail. She learned to anticipate problems, to spot signs of approaching weather, to calm nervous cattle. The other cowboys began asking her opinion, and Patterson grudgingly admitted she had good instincts. The days fell into a rhythm. Natalie would wake before dawn, pressed against Yates's warmth in their shared bedroll, and lie there for a moment savoring the feeling of belonging to someone, of being loved. Then they would rise and face the day together, working side by side until exhaustion claimed them again at night. In the quiet moments, Yates would tell her about his dreams for their future. He wanted to find work on a ranch in Montana, save money to buy some land of their own someday. He wanted to build her a house with real walls and a solid roof, wanted to give her a life where she did not have to work herself to exhaustion every day. "I want to give you everything," he said one night as they lay under a canopy of stars so thick it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. "You already have," Natalie said, snuggled against his side. "You gave me hope. You gave me love. The rest is just details." "Not to me," Yates said seriously. "You deserve comfort and security. You deserve a real home." "I have a real home," Natalie said, touching his chest over his heart. "Right here." They had been on the trail for 3 weeks when trouble found them. A group of cattle rustlers tried to steal part of the herd one night, and in the chaos that followed, shots were fired. Natalie, who had been sleeping near the chuck wagon, woke to shouting and gunfire, her heart pounding with terror. "Stay down," Yates yelled, appearing out of the darkness and pushing her behind the wagon. "Where is Thomas?" "With the remuda," Natalie gasped. The horses were kept separate from the cattle, hopefully away from the worst of the danger. The fight was brief but fierce. The cowboys drove off the rustlers, but not before one of the trail hands was wounded in the shoulder. In the aftermath, as dawn broke and they assessed the damage, Natalie helped bind the injured man's wound, her hand steady despite her racing heart. "You are good in a crisis," Patterson said approvingly, watching her work. "Some women would have fallen apart." "I grew up in mining towns," Natalie said, tying off the bandage. "Crisis is just part of life." That night, Yates held her extra tight. "I was so scared something would happen to you," he admitted. "When I heard those shots, all I could think about was keeping you safe." "I was scared too," Natalie said, "but we are all right. We are together and we are all right." "I never want to lose you," Yates said fiercely. "You and Thomas are my whole world now. You will not lose us," Natalie promised. "We are tough, all 3 of us. We are survivors." They reached Montana in early autumn, the mountains already dusted with early snow. The cattle were delivered to their buyer and Patterson paid off the crew. Yates received his wages plus a bonus for good work, and he immediately began asking around about ranch jobs. Luck was with them. A rancher named Dutch Carlson needed experienced hands for his spread about 20 miles outside of Helena. He had recently expanded his operation and was looking for cowboys who could handle both cattle and horses. When Yates mentioned that his wife could cook and his brother-in-law was good with horses, Carlson hired all 3 of them on the spot. "You will bunk in the hands' quarters," Carlson said. "It is not fancy, but it is clean and warm. Meals are provided. Wages are $30 a month for you, 20 for the boy, and 10 extra for her if she helps with the cooking and the house." It was more money than Natalie had ever made picking berries, and the prospect of regular meals and a warm place to sleep through the coming winter seemed like paradise. They accepted immediately. The Carlson Ranch was beautiful, nestled in a valley with mountains rising on 3 sides and a clear stream running through the property. The main house was a sprawling log structure, and the bunkhouse, where the single hands lived, was smaller but solid. Yates and Natalie were given a small cabin, separate from the bunkhouse, as a concession to their married status. It was just one room with a stone fireplace, but it had real walls and a wooden floor and windows with glass panes. "It is perfect," Natalie said, looking around the simple space with tears in her eyes. It was the first real home she had had since her father died, the first place that was truly theirs. "It is a start," Yates said, but he was smiling. We will make it a home." They did exactly that. Natalie sewed curtains from fabric she bought in Helena, using some of their precious savings. Yates built furniture in his spare time, constructing a real bed frame and a table with chairs. Thomas, who bunked with the other hands but took his meals with them, carved them a set of wooden bowls and cups as a housewarming gift. Life on the ranch was hard work, but good work. Yates proved himself invaluable, skilled at everything from breaking horses to repairing fences to delivering calves. Thomas learned and grew under the tutelage of the older cowboys, becoming more confident and capable with each passing week. Natalie cooked for the ranch hands and helped Mrs. Carlson, the rancher's wife, with the housework, and in return learned from her how to preserve food, how to make soap and candles, all the skills needed to run a frontier household. As autumn deepened into winter, Natalie realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week, not wanting to say anything until she was sure. But when a second week passed with no sign of her cycle, she knew. She was carrying Yates's child. She told him one evening after supper when they were alone in their cabin with the fire crackling cheerfully. "Yates, I have news." He looked up from the bridle he was mending. "Good news or bad news?" "I hope you think it is good news," Natalie said, suddenly nervous. They had never discussed children, had barely discussed the future beyond getting through each day. "I am expecting a baby." Yates dropped the bridle. For a long moment he just stared at her and Natalie's heart sank. Then a smile spread across his face, growing wider and wider until he was grinning like a fool. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. In the spring, I think," Natalie said, relief flooding through her. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Yates swept her up in his arms, careful not to squeeze too tight now that he knew about the baby. "Natalie, I am the happiest man alive. A baby. Our baby." He kissed her thoroughly, then set her down gently, his hands moving to her still flat stomach with wonder. "Is it all right? Are you all right? Do you need to see a doctor?" "I am fine," Natalie laughed. "Women have babies all the time. I am healthy and strong." "You need to take it easy," Yates said immediately. "No more heavy lifting. I will tell Mrs. Carlson you need lighter duties." "Yates, I am pregnant, not dying," Natalie said, but she was touched by his concern. "I can keep working for a good while yet." News of the baby spread through the ranch, and everyone was excited. Mrs. Carlson took Natalie under her wing even more, sharing knowledge about pregnancy and childbirth. The cowboys teased Yates mercilessly, but in a good-natured way. Dutch Carlson told them the cabin was theirs for as long as they wanted to stay, that he valued reliable help and would be happy to have the Kincaid family on his ranch permanently. The winter was hard, with deep snows and bitter cold, but their little cabin stayed warm and snug. Yates hunted when he could, adding to their larder. Thomas visited often, excited about becoming an uncle. Natalie grew slowly larger, her body changing to accommodate the life growing within her. On quiet evenings, Yates would play his guitar and sing to her and the baby. He would put his hand on her swelling belly and talk to the child, telling stories, making promises about the life they would build together. Natalie would sit and sew tiny clothes, feeling more content than she had ever imagined possible. "Remember when we met?" she said one evening in late February. "You were just a cowboy looking for berries, and I was just trying to make enough money to survive another day. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," Yates said. "The way the sunlight caught your hair, the determination in your eyes. I knew right then that my life was about to change." "You changed mine," Natalie said softly. "You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted. Love, safety, a future, a family. We gave each other everything," Yates corrected. "I was just drifting before I met you, Natalie. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to build something instead of just moving from place to place." "Do you ever regret it?" Natalie asked. "Giving up your freedom, tying yourself down to a wife and child?" "Never," Yates said firmly. "Not for one single second. You and this baby are the best things that ever happened to me. I would choose you again every day for the rest of my life." The baby came in late April, during a warm spell that brought early wildflowers to the mountain meadows. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Natalie was sure she could not endure another minute. But Mrs. Carlson was with her throughout, and Yates held her hand when he was allowed in the room, and finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. "A boy," Mrs. Carlson said, placing the squalling, red-faced infant on Natalie's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Natalie looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy. He had a shock of dark hair in his father's nose, and he was absolutely perfect. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." When Yates was allowed back in, he stood frozen at the door, staring at his wife and son with an expression of pure awe. Natalie smiled at him through her tears. "Come meet your son." Yates approached slowly, almost reverently, and when Natalie placed the baby in his arms, she watched his face transform. He looked down at the tiny life they had created, and tears streamed openly down his weathered cheeks. "He is perfect," Yates whispered. "He is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the winter but never quite settled on one. Looking at her husband holding their son, Natalie suddenly knew. "William," she said. "William James Kincaid, after my father and your brother." "William James," Yates repeated, and the baby seemed to settle at the sound of his voice. "Billy, I like it. I like it a lot." Thomas came to see his nephew that evening and was amazed at the tiny person in the cradle Yates had built. "He is so small," Thomas said wonderingly. "Can I hold him?" Natalie showed him how, and Thomas sat very carefully with his nephew in his arms, looking terrified and thrilled in equal measure. "Hello, Billy," he said softly. "I am your Uncle Thomas. I promise I will teach you everything I know." The ranch celebrated the birth with a special supper, and Dutch Carlson gave them a week off so Natalie could recover, and they could settle into life as new parents. Those first days were exhausting and wonderful, filled with diaper changes and midnight feedings and moments of pure magic when Billy would look up at them with wide, wondering eyes. Yates was a devoted father from the start. He would walk Billy around their cabin for hours when the baby was fussy, singing soft songs and telling him stories. He changed diapers without complaint and learned to soothe the baby's tears. Watching him with their son, Natalie fell even more deeply in love with her husband. As spring turned to summer, they settled into a new routine. Natalie wore Billy in a sling while she worked, the baby content to sleep against her chest or watch the world with growing curiosity. Yates would take breaks to come see them, stealing kisses from his wife and nuzzling his son's soft head. Thomas visited whenever his work allowed, clearly smitten with his nephew. "I am so grateful for this life," Natalie said one evening as they sat outside their cabin watching the sunset, Billy nursing contentedly. "Sometimes I still cannot believe it is real." "It is real," Yates said, his arm around her shoulders. "It is our life, the one we built together. And it is only going to get better." He was right. Over the next few years, their life deepened and grew richer. Yates was promoted to foreman when the previous foreman retired, a position that came with better pay and more responsibility. Thomas, now 17, had become one of the ranch's best horse trainers, with a gift for working with difficult animals. They were able to save money, putting away every spare dollar toward their dream of their own land someday. When Billy was 2 years old, Natalie became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do, and in the spring of 1889 they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Grace Elizabeth, and she had her mother's dark eyes and her father's gentle disposition. Billy was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. He would bring her his favorite toys and pat her soft head with chubby, careful hands. Watching her children together, Natalie felt her heart might burst with happiness. Their little cabin was getting cramped with 2 children, and Dutch Carlson, seeing their situation, offered them a larger cabin that had previously been used for storage. It had 2 rooms plus a loft, and Yates spent his spare time fixing it up, making it comfortable for their growing family. "This is better," Natalie said, looking around their new home. "But someday I still want land of our own, a place where we build everything from scratch, where the children can run free and we can grow old watching the mountains." "We will have it," Yates promised. "I have been talking to the banker in Helena. In another year or 2, we should have enough saved for a down payment on some land. There is a valley about 10 miles north of here that is opening up for homesteading. We could file a claim, build a ranch of our own." The thought sustained them through the hard times. When Billy got sick with a fever that had them terrified for 3 days. When Grace had colic and cried for hours every evening. When blizzards trapped them inside for days on end. Through it all, they had each other and their dreams of the future. In the summer of 1890, Thomas announced he was courting a girl from Helena, the daughter of the feed store owner. Her name was Sarah, and she was pretty and practical and clearly smitten with the tall, capable young man Thomas had become. Natalie was thrilled to see her brother so happy, and when Thomas and Sarah married that fall, it felt like another piece of their family puzzle falling into place. By the spring of 1891, Yates and Natalie had saved enough money. The valley Yates had mentioned was still available, and they filed a claim on 160 acres of beautiful, fertile land with a creek running through it and mountains rising all around. Dutch Carlson was sorry to see them go, but understood their dream of independence. He threw them a farewell party and gave them supplies to help them get started. They moved to their land in May, just as the wildflowers were blooming. For the first months, they lived in a tent while Yates and Thomas built a cabin. It was hard work, and there were days when Natalie wondered if they had made a mistake leaving the security of the Carlson ranch. But then she would look at their land, at the mountains they owned a piece of, at her children playing in the creek, and she knew they had made the right choice. The cabin rose slowly but steadily. It was larger than the ones they had lived in before, with 3 rooms and a real porch. Yates built it with love and care, thinking about his family's needs, making sure it was solid and warm and safe. By autumn, it was finished enough to move into, and that first night sleeping in their own house on their own land felt like a triumph. They bought a small herd of cattle with the last of their savings and some borrowed money. Yates and Thomas worked from dawn to dusk building fences, clearing fields, establishing the ranch. Natalie tended a large garden, preserved food for the winter, and cared for the children. It was the hardest work any of them had ever done, but it was their work, building their future with their own hands. Sarah proved to be a wonderful addition to the family. She and Thomas settled in a small cabin they built on the edge of the property, and she helped Natalie with the endless work. The 2 women became close friends, sharing the burdens and joys of frontier life. Billy grew into a sturdy boy who loved animals and the outdoors. He followed his father everywhere, learning to ride and rope and care for livestock. Grace was more introspective, content to help her mother in the garden or play with the kittens from the barn cat's latest litter. Watching them grow, Natalie marveled at how different they were from each other, but how perfectly they fit into the family. In the spring of 1893, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. She was 31 now, and this pregnancy felt different from the others. She was more tired, more prone to illness, and as her belly swelled, she sometimes felt worried in a way she had not with the previous pregnancies. "Are you all right?" Yates asked one evening, finding her sitting on the porch steps looking tired. "Just weary," Natalie said. "This baby is taking more out of me than the others did." "You should rest more," Yates said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "We can manage without you working so hard." "We all work hard," Natalie said. "That is the price of building something of our own." "Not at the cost of your health," Yates said firmly. "I want you to take it easier, Natalie. Please, for me and for the baby." She agreed, though it went against her nature to slow down. But she was tired, so tired, and as the summer heat intensified, she found herself napping during the day and going to bed earlier at night. The baby came early in late October, during the first snow of the season. The labor was harder than the others, and the midwife they had summoned from Helena looked worried more than once. But Natalie was strong, and after many hours of struggle, she delivered another son, smaller than the others but with a good, strong cry. "Another boy," the midwife said, relief clear in her voice. "He is small but seems healthy. You did well, Mrs. Kincaid." They named him Daniel Thomas after no one in particular, just because they liked the name. Billy and Grace were excited about another sibling, and the household adjusted to having an infant again. But Daniel was different from the other babies. He was fussier, slower to gain weight, and Natalie worried constantly about him. Yates tried to reassure her, but even he could see that their youngest son was more fragile than the others had been. "He will catch up," Yates said, holding the tiny boy against his chest. "He just needs time to grow strong." And slowly, Daniel did grow stronger. By his first birthday, he had caught up to where he should be, and the worry that had gripped Natalie's heart began to ease. He would never be as robust as Billy, but he was healthy and happy, and that was enough. The years flowed on like the creek that ran through their property, each season bringing its own challenges and rewards. The ranch grew and prospered. They added more cattle, built a bigger barn, fenced more pasture. Thomas and Sarah had children of their own, first a daughter they named Emma, then a son they named Michael. The children grew up together, cousins as close as siblings. Billy, as he grew older, proved to have his father's gift with cattle and horses. He was quiet and steady, reliable in ways that made Yates proud. Grace surprised them all by developing a passion for reading and learning. Yates rode to Helena and bought her every book he could afford, and she would read to her younger brother by the fire on winter evenings. Daniel, their youngest, was the dreamer of the family. He loved to draw and would spend hours sketching the mountains, the animals, the people around him. Natalie saw something of herself in Daniel, that combination of practicality and longing for something beyond the everyday that had once driven her to pick berries at dawn and dream of something better. In the summer of 1900, Billy turned 18, and Yates and Natalie realized with shock that they had been married for 15 years. 15 years since that morning in Piotch when a cowboy had seen a woman picking berries and decided to pick a future with her instead. 15 years, Natalie said, lying in bed beside her husband one warm June night. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "Best 15 years of my life," Yates said, pulling her close. "Every single day with you has been a gift, Natalie, even the hard days." "We have built something good here," Natalie said, looking around their bedroom in the house they had built together. "Our children are healthy and happy. The ranch is thriving. We have family close by. This is everything I dreamed of and more." "Do you ever think about those mornings in Nevada?" Yates asked. You picking berries alone, working so hard just to survive. Sometimes, Natalie admitted. And then I think about how different my life would be if you had not stopped that morning. I would probably still be picking berries, still struggling to keep Thomas and me fed and housed. Or maybe we would have given up and moved on to another mining town, another cycle of hope and disappointment. I think about what my life would be if I had ridden past that morning, Yates said quietly. I would probably still be drifting from cattle drive to cattle drive, never settling, never building anything real. Certainly never knowing the joy of loving you, of having our children, of creating this life we share. We saved each other, Natalie said, touching his face gently. You saved me from a life of hardship and loneliness, and I saved you from a life of drifting without purpose. We found each other, Yates corrected. And we chose each other, every day since. They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never quite faded, even after 15 years and 3 children. Afterwards, wrapped in each other's arms, they talked about the future. Billy would likely want to start his own spread soon. Grace had mentioned wanting to go to the new teachers' college in Helena. Daniel was only 7, still years away from making his way in the world, but already showing signs of artistic talent that might take him in unexpected directions. Whatever they choose, wherever they go, we gave them a foundation, Yates said. We gave them a home, love, security. That is more than either of us had growing up. It is everything, Natalie agreed. The next few years brought changes, as years always do. Billy did indeed start his own small ranch on a piece of land adjacent to theirs, building his own cabin and slowly accumulating his own herd. He courted and married a practical young woman named Catherine from a neighboring ranch, and they settled down to start their own family. Natalie became a grandmother at 43, overwhelmed with emotion when she held Billy's daughter for the first time. Grace did go to teachers' college in Helena, and Natalie felt both proud and bereft watching her daughter leave. But Grace came home often, and eventually she got a position teaching at the new school being built in their growing community. She boarded with a family during the week and came home on weekends, bringing books and stories of her students. Daniel continued to develop his artistic abilities. When a traveling painter came through the area and saw Daniel's work, he offered to take the boy on as an apprentice. It was a difficult decision, but ultimately they let 14-year-old Daniel go to butt with the painter, trusting that following his passion was the right choice. He wrote home often, his letters full of excitement about his studies. Thomas and Sarah's children grew alongside the Kincaid children, and the combined families formed the nucleus of a small community. Other homesteaders arrived, drawn by the good land and water. A town began to form at the crossroads 5 miles from the Kincaid ranch, with a general store, a church, and eventually a school. Yates and Natalie, now in their 40s, found themselves becoming elders in this new community. People came to Yates for advice on ranching, to Natalie for help with difficult births or illnesses. They had built not just a life but a legacy, something that would outlast them. On a spring morning in 1905, Natalie woke early and found herself drawn outside. The dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and the wildflowers were blooming in the meadow beyond their house. On impulse, she took a basket and walked out into the meadow, bending to pick the flowers, breathing in their sweet scent. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Yates approaching, a smile on his face. He was 52 now, his hair shot through with silver, his face deeply lined from years in the sun, but to Natalie, he was as handsome as the day she met him. "What are you doing out here so early?" he asked, reaching her side. "Picking flowers," Natalie said, holding up her basket. It reminded me of picking berries all those years ago in Nevada. I was just thinking about that, Yates said wonderingly. I woke up thinking about the first morning I saw you. How you looked in the dawn light, how my whole life changed in that moment. 20 years, Natalie said softly. 20 years since a cowboy stopped to pick berries and ended up picking a future instead. Best choice I ever made, Yates said, taking her free hand. Would you make the same choice again? If you could go back, knowing everything that would happen, all the struggles and hardships, in a heartbeat, Natalie said without hesitation. Every challenge was worth it. Every hard day was worth it. Because it brought us here, to this moment, to this life we built together. They stood there in the flower-filled meadow, the mountains rising around them, their ranch spread out below, smoke rising from their chimney and the chimneys of their children's homes. Everything they had dreamed of that morning in Nevada had come true, and more besides. I love you, Yates said, pulling her close. I have loved you every single day for 20 years, and I will love you every single day for as long as I live. I love you too, Natalie said, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Forever. They walked back to the house hand in hand as the sun climbed higher, ready to face another day together. Grace would be arriving tonight for the weekend, and Billy was bringing his family over for Sunday dinner. Daniel's latest letter had mentioned he might be coming home for a visit soon. Their lives were full of family and work and purpose. That evening, gathered around the large table Yates had built years ago, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Natalie looked around and felt complete satisfaction. This was what they had worked for, what they had built together. Not just a ranch or a house, but a family, a legacy of love and strength that would continue long after they were gone. What are you thinking about? Yates asked softly, leaning close. About how lucky we are, Natalie said. About how one chance meeting changed everything. It was not just luck, Yates said. It was choice. I chose to stop that morning. You chose to trust me. We chose each other and we kept choosing each other every single day. And I would choose you again, Natalie said, squeezing his hand under the table. Forever and always. The years continued to pass, gentler now. They were no longer young, and the hard physical work of ranching fell more and more to Billy and the ranch hands they employed. But Yates and Natalie were content with this quieter pace. They spent their days in each other's company, working together on smaller projects, sitting on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains they loved. Grace married a teacher from Helena and settled permanently in the growing town near their ranch. Daniel came home after 5 years away, a trained artist now, and built a small studio on the family property where he painted the Montana landscape he loved. Billy's ranch prospered, and he gave Yates and Natalie 3 grandchildren who visited often. Thomas and Sarah remained close neighbors and dear friends. The 4 of them would gather often, reminiscing about the old days, marveling at how far they had all come from that difficult time in Piotch. In the spring of 1915, Yates and Natalie celebrated their 30th anniversary. Their children threw them a party, and it seemed like the whole community turned out to celebrate the couple who had been among the first settlers in the valley. There were speeches and toasts and a cake that Grace had made, and through it all, Yates and Natalie sat hand in hand, overwhelmed by the love that surrounded them. 30 years, Natalie said that night as they prepared for bed. We have been married for 30 years. We have raised 3 children, built a ranch, helped found a community. We have lived a whole life together. And I would not change a single moment, Yates said, helping her with the buttons on her dress. His fingers were stiffer now with age, but still gentle. You have been my partner in everything, Natalie. My love, my friend, my whole world. And you have been mine, Natalie said, turning to face him. There were lines on her face now and gray in her hair, but her eyes were the same dark eyes that had captivated him that morning in Nevada. I never imagined I could be this happy. That life could be this full. They climbed into bed, the same bed Yates had built in their first cabin and rebuilt larger in this house, and lay in each other's arms as they had done for 30 years. Outside, the Montana night was soft with spring, and inside, their hearts were full of gratitude for the life they had built together. The final years of their story were peaceful ones. They grew old together gracefully, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts still sharp. They watched their grandchildren grow, and eventually, they welcomed great-grandchildren. Billy's oldest daughter married and had a son she named Yates, and when Natalie held that baby for the first time, she wept at the beautiful continuity of it all. Grace became the principal of the school, respected and beloved by the community. Daniel's paintings began to sell beyond Montana, and he became known as an artist who could capture the soul of the West. But both always made time for their parents, visiting often, ensuring that Yates and Natalie's final years were filled with family and love. One morning in the summer of 1920, Natalie woke to find Yates watching her, a soft smile on his weathered face. He was 67 now and she was 58, and they had been married for 35 years. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, the same question they had asked each other thousands of times over the decades. "About how beautiful you still are," Yates said. "And about how grateful I am for every single day we have had together." "We have been blessed," Natalie agreed, reaching for his hand. Their fingers intertwined automatically, a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. "You remember picking berries in Nevada?" Yates asked. "Do you remember how young we were, how uncertain about everything?" "I remember being so tired," Natalie said. "Tired and scared and alone, and then you rode up on your horse and everything changed. I took one look at you and knew my life would never be the same," Yates said. "I did not know exactly what would happen, but I knew I wanted to find out. I knew I wanted you in my future." "And here we are," Natalie said softly. 35 years later, still together, still in love." "Still in love," Yates agreed. "More in love if that is possible. Because now I know you in ways I could not have imagined back then. I know your strength and your kindness, your wisdom and your courage. I know how you look in every season of life, and I have loved you in all of them." Natalie felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you, Yates Kincaid. I loved you when we were young and everything was possible. I loved you through the hard years when we were building our life. And I love you now when we can sit on our porch and watch our legacy unfold around us." They spent that day together, doing simple things. Walking through the meadow where they had picked flowers years before. Sitting on the porch watching the mountains. Visiting with Billy and his family. Holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. It was a perfect day, the kind of day they had given each other thousands of times over the decades. As the years flowed on into the 1920s, Yates and Natalie remained fixtures of their community and family. Though their steps were slower and they tired more easily, they were still deeply engaged with life. Every Sunday, their house filled with children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and Natalie would cook enormous meals while Yates entertained the little ones with stories of the old days. The world was changing around them. The town that had been just a crossroads was now a thriving community with paved streets and automobiles. The ranch that they had carved from wilderness was now a substantial operation that Billy ran with skill and care. The children they had raised in a log cabin now lived in proper houses with electricity and indoor plumbing. But some things never changed. The love between Yates and Natalie remained constant, a steady flame that had never dimmed. They still held hands when they walked. They still stole kisses when they thought no one was looking. They still talked for hours, finding new things to discover about each other even after nearly 4 decades together. On a crisp autumn morning in 1925, Natalie found Yates in the barn, brushing down his old horse. He was 72 now, and she was 63, and they moved with the careful deliberation of the elderly. But there was still strength in his arms as he worked the brush, still grace in her movements as she came to stand beside him. "The aspens are turning gold," she said, watching the grove of trees beyond the barn shimmer in the morning light. "It is my favorite time of year." "Mine too," Yates said, setting down the brush and putting his arm around her. "Though every season is beautiful when I share it with you." "You old romantic," Natalie said, but she was smiling. "After all these years, you still know how to make my heart flutter." "I hope I never stop," Yates said. "What would be the point of living if I could not tell you how much I love you every single day?" They stood there in the barn, two old people who had loved each other through every kind of weather and felt the deep contentment of a life well lived. They had not had an easy life, but they had had a good one. They had worked hard and loved hard and built something that would outlast them. That afternoon, Grace visited with news that she was to be honored as Teacher of the Year for the entire state of Montana. Daniel had just sold a painting to a museum in Chicago. Billy's youngest son had been accepted to the agricultural college. The legacy of what Yates and Natalie had built together was flourishing in ways they could never have imagined that morning in Piotch. "We did all right," Yates said that evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "All those years ago when I asked you to take a chance on a drifting cowboy, you could not have known how it would turn out, but we did all right." "We did better than all right," Natalie said firmly. "We built a life of love and purpose. We raised good children who are raising good children of their own. We helped build a community. We created something that matters. Because of you," Yates said, "because you had the courage to say yes, because you worked beside me every step of the way. Because you loved me even when I did not deserve it." "You always deserved it," Natalie said. "From that first morning when you asked to pick berries alongside me, you showed me who you were. A kind man, a gentle man, a man of honor. That has never changed." As the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, they sat in comfortable silence. They had said all the important things to each other many times over the years, but some things bore repeating. "Thank you," Yates said finally, "for saying yes, for trusting me, for building this life with me, for loving me." "Thank you for stopping that morning," Natalie replied, "for seeing me, for choosing me, for picking a future with me instead of just picking berries." They laughed together, the sound warm and rich with shared history. Then they sat and watched the stars come out, one by one, over the land they loved and the life they had built together. The years rolled on, and Yates and Natalie continued to age with grace and dignity. In 1930, they celebrated their 45th anniversary with another huge family gathering. The house was packed with 3 generations of descendants, all of them there because of the choice a young cowboy and a berry-picking woman had made to build a life together. Billy gave a speech at the party, his voice thick with emotion. "My parents taught me everything important," he said. "They taught me the value of hard work and the importance of family. They showed me what real love looks like, the kind that lasts through hard times and good times, the kind that builds something permanent. Everything I am, everything all of us are, starts with them." Grace spoke next, tears streaming down her face. "When I was growing up, I thought everyone's parents were like mine. I thought every father sang to his children like ours did, and every mother was as strong and wise as ours. It was only when I grew up that I realized how special they are, how rare their kind of love is. They are the foundation we all built our lives on. Daniel, always better with images than words, had instead painted a portrait of his parents. It showed them as they were now, old and weathered but still clearly in love, sitting on their porch with the mountains behind them. When he unveiled it, there was not a dry eye in the room. Yates and Natalie sat through it all, holding hands, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. At the end of the evening, when everyone had finally left, and it was just the two of them again, Natalie said, "I never imagined we would build all this. When I was that scared young woman picking berries just trying to survive, I never dreamed life could hold this much joy." "Neither did I," Yates said. "I was just a cowboy without direction, drifting from job to job. Then I saw you in the morning light, and suddenly I had a direction. Suddenly I had a purpose." "We gave each other purpose," Natalie said. "That is what love does. It gives us something to work for, something to build." They were in their late 70s now, and they both knew that their time together was growing short, but they did not speak of it, did not dwell on the inevitable. Instead, they focused on each day they had, each moment together, treasuring it all. In the spring of 1932, Yates developed a cough that would not go away. The doctor came from town and gave them the news they had both been dreading. His heart was weak, his lungs were compromised from decades of hard work and harsh weather. He might have months or he might have years, but his time was limited. "How long?" Natalie asked the doctor, her hand gripping Yates's. "That is hard to say," the doctor said gently. "He should rest as much as possible, avoid exertion. But Mrs. Kincaid, at his age with these conditions, I would make the most of the time you have left together." After the doctor left, they sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Yates said, "I am not afraid of dying, Natalie. I have lived a full life, a happy life, but I am afraid of leaving you." "I am afraid of being left," Natalie admitted. "We have been together for so long, I do not know how to be without you." "You are stronger than you think," Yates said. "You were strong before you met me, and you will be strong after I am gone. But hopefully, that is still a long way off. Let us not waste what time we have worrying about the end." So they did not. They spent the summer enjoying each other and their family. Yates reduced his work to almost nothing, and they spent long hours on their porch, watching the world go by. They talked about everything, reliving their favorite memories, laughing at old stories, crying over hard times that were now softened by distance. "You have any regrets?" Natalie asked one afternoon as they sat in the meadow where they had picked flowers years ago. Yates thought carefully. "I regret that I do not have more time with you. I regret that I will not see all our great-grandchildren grow up, that I will miss future joys. But I do not regret any choice we made. Every decision, even the hard ones, brought us here. And here is pretty wonderful." "It is," Natalie agreed, leaning against him. "We have been so blessed, Yates, to find each other, to build this life, to have all these years together. I would not trade a single day." That autumn, Yates grew weaker. He tired easily and spent more time resting, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Natalie never dimmed. Every morning he would wake and tell her he loved her. Every night he would fall asleep in her arms. They treasured each moment, knowing that their time together was growing short. On a crisp October morning, with the aspens golden and the air sharp with approaching winter, Yates woke feeling peaceful. Natalie was already awake beside him, watching him with love in her eyes. "Good morning, my love," he said softly. "Good morning," Natalie replied, touching his face gently. "How are you feeling?" "Good," Yates said. "Tired, but good. Natalie, I need you to know something. These years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You made me a better man than I ever would have been without you. You gave me purpose and love and a reason to build something permanent. I have no regrets, no sorrows. I am the luckiest man who ever lived." "I am the lucky one," Natalie said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You saved me, Yates. You gave me everything." "We saved each other," Yates said. "That is what we do. That is what love does." He closed his eyes then, still holding her hand, and his breathing gradually slowed. Natalie sat with him, talking softly, telling him how much she loved him, recounting their life together. She told him about the morning they met, about their wedding day, about the births of their children. She told him about every joy and triumph they had shared. As the morning sun climbed higher, Yates Kincaid passed peacefully from the world, his hand in his wife's, surrounded by love and memories of a life well lived. The funeral was huge, the whole community turning out to honor a man who had been a pillar of their world. People spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his skill as a rancher, and his devotion as a father and grandfather, but it was Natalie's words that moved people to tears. "My husband was the best man I ever knew," she said simply. "He picked berries with me at dawn, and he picked a future with me. He kept that promise every single day for 47 years. He loved me, he supported me, he built a life with me. I am so grateful for every moment we had together, and I will carry his love in my heart until we meet again." After Yates died, Natalie moved into a smaller house on Billy's property. She was 70 years old now, still strong but growing frail. Her children worried about her, but she assured them she was all right. She had her memories, her family, and the knowledge that she had been deeply loved. She lived for 5 more years, spending her days surrounded by family, tending a small garden and telling stories of the old days to her great-grandchildren. She spoke often of Yates, keeping his memory alive, making sure everyone knew the story of how a cowboy had stopped to pick berries one morning and changed the course of 2 lives forever. On a spring morning in 1937, Natalie woke feeling light and free. She was 75 years old, and she had been without Yates for 5 long years. But that morning, she felt his presence so strongly it was as if he were in the room with her. Grace found her later that day, sitting in her chair by the window, her eyes closed and a peaceful smile on her face. She had passed quietly, slipping away as gently as a spring breeze. At Natalie's funeral, the minister spoke of a life well lived, of a woman who had overcome hardship to build something beautiful. But it was Daniel who captured the essence of his mother's story. "She picked berries at dawn to survive," he said, his voice breaking. "And then a cowboy met her there and picked a future with her instead. Together, they built something that will last long after we are all gone. They built a family, a legacy of love and strength. Every one of us here exists because they chose each other that morning in Nevada. We are their legacy, and we will make sure their story never dies." Natalie was buried beside Yates in the small cemetery near the church they had helped build. Their grave overlooks the valley they settled, the ranch they built, the mountains they loved. The headstone reads simply, "Yates and Natalie Kincaid, together forever. Their love built a legacy, and that legacy continues." The ranch is still in the family, now run by Billy's grandchildren. The town they helped found has grown into a thriving community. Grace's descendants include teachers, doctors, and leaders. Daniel's artistic gifts passed down through generations. The family tree that started with a chance meeting at dawn has spread wide, touching hundreds of lives. But more than land or accomplishments, Yates and Natalie's real legacy is the example they set. They showed that love is not just a feeling but a choice made every day. They proved that with hard work and dedication, 2 people can build something lasting. They demonstrated that the greatest adventures are not about traveling the world, but about building a life with someone you love. On summer mornings, when the wildflowers bloom in the Montana meadows and the sun rises over the mountains, You can almost see them there still. A young woman picking berries at dawn, her hands stained purple, her face marked by hardship but also by hope. A cowboy on horseback, seeing her in the morning light and knowing his life is about to change. Two people choosing each other, choosing love, choosing to build a future together. And somewhere, beyond the veil between worlds, they are together still. Yates and Natalie Kincaid, the cowboy and his bride, dancing in eternal meadows, their love as constant as the mountains, as enduring as the sunrise, as infinite as the Montana sky they both loved so well. Their story is over, but the love they shared lives on in every descendant, every story told, every sunrise that breaks over the land they settled and made their own. They picked berries at dawn. They picked each other. They picked a future filled with love, family, and purpose. And in doing so, they created something that will last forever. That is the power of love. That is the legacy of two people who chose each other and built a life worth living.